David Brewster here in the episode of Scales and Tales, and this is Marty Friedman's Exotic Scales. And I've had lots of students over the years ask about this area of these kind of exotic, scales and modes. And you can definitely find this in Marty Friedman's music, whether it's cacophony or Megadeth or his solo material. And you can also find this in other styles of music, not just metal. You can hear it in classical and jazz. It's all over the place. For a lot of players, Marty Friedman's kind of the ambassador of these exotic sounds. And for those of you familiar with Marty Friedman's playing, then you know what I'm talking about. But if you're not that familiar with Marty Friedman or his work with Megadeth or Cacophony or his solo material, he has a lot more music, a lot more albums than I think a lot of people out there realize. Some people just think of Cacophony and Megadeth, or some people don't even, remember Cacophony and they just think of Megadeth and maybe a few solo albums. But Marty's definitely been on the scene for a while, and he's just consistently put out, great content, material, and albums. In case you're curious, I did have a lesson in Guitar Player magazine. This was the August 2019 issue, and in this issue, I had a tribute to Marty Friedman. It's a lesson called Tornado of Solos, which is right here. There's a good picture of Marty. And in this lesson, I kind of flesh out this concept that I've used with students for years, and it works. It definitely helps you get an earful of these scales and the exotic flavors and stuff that you'll hear in Marty's music. But I also put a lesson together on this channel, Unlocking Exotic Scales, which that was last year. I think it was in July of 2020. And that's related to the lesson in Guitar Player. It's also related to this lesson. But this lesson is going to take this information and move it even further. So we're going to actually make some progress here. So here we go. This lesson's entirely in drop D, which Marty Friedman's not really known for playing in drop D, but there's a reason I'm using this tuning. The Guitar Player lesson was actually just in standard tuning, and it used the low E string as a drone. And we also mimicked this, concept in the Unlocking Exotic Scales, Scales and Tales episode I put together. So we're going to keep, this drop D tuning, mainly so we can move this to the key of D. And then once you actually watch this lesson and you see what I'm going to do, it'll totally make sense. At first you might be like, well, hey, we've already done this, but we're going to do a lot more with it. So the first thing we're going to do here, we're going to drop D, and then we're just going to locate, D natural minor, or D Aeolian, which lives right here. Right, and I'm using that low open D as, kind of a fundamental tone, just so I can kind of hear the pitch or the key. Like that. So there's a 1 octave, D Aeolian. And then we can flesh that out to 2 octaves. And there we basically have D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and D. So just a pure natural minor scale. A flat 3, a flat 6, and a flat 7 right there. So here's an image with D Aeolian kind of mapped out. So now we're going to convert Aeolian to harmonic minor, and all we have to do is raise the 7th. So Aeolian had a flat 7, which was that C natural, and D harmonic minor is going to have a C sharp, or that major 7. And so, here's Aeolian. And then harmonic minor with that raised 7. Sound, think Yngwie Malmsteen for sure. Yngwie plays harmonic minor all the time. But here's a diagram showing me that conversion. Okay, next up we're going to convert Aeolian into Phrygian. And now all we're going to do is take Aeolian and lower the 2nd. So we're going to change E to E flat and then keep everything else the same. And it'll magically change to D Phrygian, like this. Very, very common in metal. So there's the 1 octave fingering right there. And a 2 octave fingering here. And that half-step movement from the root is the telltale sign that it's Phrygian, or at least related to Phrygian. And here's a diagram showing that conversion from Aeolian to Phrygian. Next up is Phrygian dominant. So we can think of this two different ways. We can take Aeolian and we can flat the second and raise the third, or we could just take Phrygian and raise the third. Either way. So here's D Aeolian again. Here's D Phrygian again. And here's D Phrygian dominant. It still has that half-step movement from the root, but now you have that major third right there, that F sharp. So there's one octave and then two octaves. And here's a chart showing the conversion to a Phrygian dominant. Gypsy scale, and there's a couple different ways we could look at this. You could think of Aeolian, and we're going to lower the second, we're going to raise the third, and we're also going to raise the seventh. And if you want to think of Phrygian dominant, you could think of Phrygian dominant with a major 7 or a raised 7. So it's kind of like Phrygian dominant and harmonic minor, you know, mixed up together. But then D Gypsy would be like this. Very exotic, very unusual sound. The two octave fingerings right here. It's really unusual because you have these 3 half steps in a row right there. Right? Especially if you go all the way up. See the way that lines up like that if you go 2 octaves like that. Very unusual, very different sound, but Marty definitely uses, you know, the Gypsy scale in some of his solos and stuff. So here's an image with that conversion to the Gypsy scale. Last but not least here is D Hungarian minor, which definitely Marty Friedman loves Hungarian minor too. And once again, this is this mixed up, kind of strange, exotic, you know, scale. But now we're basically playing D harmonic minor with a raised 4th. So we're kind of merging harmonic minor and Lydian together. But it's really cool, something like this. And once again, we have this lineup of, you know, 3 half steps in a row right here. Because there's your sharp 4, that G sharp. There's your 5th, which is A, and then a flat 6, which is B flat. So that's really strange. They're all right there. And there's that raised 7th or major 7, you know, from harmonic minor. So it's this really kind of mixed up world, but it's cool. So there's 1 octave. And the 2 octave version has this big stretch in it here, like this. So here's an image with a conversion to Hungarian minor. Okay, the next phase of this, we're going to take everything we just did and we're going to move it down an octave. And then this is going to kind of reveal how guitarists are able to build like single note riffs and these kind of lower, you know, melodic riffs and rhythms and stuff like that, you know, using these exotic scales. Marty does this all the time. So to start, we're going to basically play D Aeolian right here on the bottom 2 strings, like this. You know, there's your D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and D, right? Just a 1 octave right there. Now what we're going to do is create this kind of riff or a rhythm. I mean, you can practice the scale like this. Run that over and over and over, but that's kind of boring. So let's make some music happen. So now what we're going to do is we're going to bang on the low D, or that low E string that's tuned to D. We're going to bang on that, just kind of a steady 16th note rhythm, and then descend the notes on the A, return to that low D, and then descend the notes there on the low, you know, E string right there. And we're going to turn it into a riff, kind of like this, so you can hear what it sounds like in this kind of generic, metal riff like this. That way you can hear the sound of that scale. There's Aeolian. Now Ussen, do the same thing. Right? That way you can kind of hear. Now you can combine, descending and ascending like this. Convert that to harmonic minor. So all we have to do is raise the 7. So that C natural is going to change to C sharp. Everything else is the same. Now let's do the scale first. There's D harmonic minor. Let's try Phrygian, do the same thing, but now we're going to play that flat 2 right there, that E flat. We're going to do the same thing that we did in Aeolian, but just make sure it's a flat 2, like that. There's D Phrygian. And then do that riff again. Do convert that to Phrygian dominant. We're going to raise the 3rd, which basically that F is going to change to F sharp. And now you have this. There's D Phrygian dominant. Gypsy scale. Now we're going to keep everything the same and we're going to raise the 7th again, like this. There's D Gypsy right there. Last but not least, Hungarian minor, and that's going to be really different. So now we're doing this. Right, the last concept using this idea, we're going to basically take what we just did, down here, and now we're going to move that up 2 octaves higher. So now we're going to find this kind of higher register, where you might find licks and leads and stuff like that, soloing, using these scales. So we're going to do basically the same kind of thing, but now, here's D Aeolian way up here. Right? There's your D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and D. Now this scale position right here, this really gives you a bird's eye view of what we've been doing. It's really easy to see what you're doing, when you just kind of look down and you can see these notes and these scales kind of morphing and changing. So there's Aeolian once again. And then for this, kind of a musical example, I guess, let's just create a really basic melody using that scale. We're going to descend. And we're going to do this, and we're going to run this through all these different scales too, which really will help you hear what the scale sounds like. So here's just the raw scale. And then this really simple melodic idea I'm going to add to it is like this. Very simple melody, nothing hard to play, but it is kind of moving through the scale and gives you a little sample of what it sounds like that. Literally just kind of cruising down, skipping over the 5th, and grabbing the 4th right there, that G note, and then hit the 5th, which is that A. So we're kind of setting up that A note at the end, and then walking down to the root. Very simple, but like I said, it kind of gives you a little sneak peek of what the scale sounds like. convert that to harmonic minor, we're going to raise that C to C sharp. And so here's the scale. But then let's convert that melody that we had into harmonic minor like this. Just that one note kind of twisted that melody in a different direction. Instead of really cool. And then Phrygian, just kind of keep morphing that scale. So here's Phrygian. And if you descend that melody, you can kind of hear what that sounds like. Convert that to Phrygian dominant, raise that third, that F to F sharp. And then create that little melody using Phrygian dominant. Right. The Gypsy scale, take that same thing but raise the seventh, raise that C to C sharp, and you're playing, D Gypsy. Melody, in Gypsy sounds like this. And then last but not least here is the Hungarian minor, and that's going to be like this. And that little melody converted to Hungarian minor is like this. Of course, you can extend it. You can go even higher. We're in the key of D. Technically, if you have 22 frets, there's a D note waiting right there. You could take that scale or any of these scales and convert it even further. Do some stuff like that, kind of getting those higher, registers and the higher, area on the fretboard right there. That's going to wrap this episode of Scales and Tales with Marty Friedman's exotic scales. And there are tons of other players. It's not just Marty. I mean, Yngwie uses a lot of these sounds and stuff too. Jeff Loomis, there's a ton of players out there that are well versed, in these exotic flavors and sounds that you find in music. But it's interesting. It's also very inspiring, especially if you're used to just playing straight, pentatonic and blues scales and stuff like that. The minute you start whipping out Hungarian minor or even harmonic minor, it sounds so different and unusual and interesting. Who knows, you might write a song or part of a new solo or a riff or something just playing around, with these scales and sounds. So definitely, there's a lot more to this subject than what we just ran through. We're just kind of skimming the surface and getting your toe in the pool, getting you used to these different flavors and sounds, kind of breaking down, the construction. And then the next thing you know, like once you practice this stuff, you'll start making some licks or riffs or some, music happen using these sounds. So it's very, eye-opening and inspiring. It's also really confusing because you're going to be, doing things that you don't normally do if this is new, territory for you. Now, if you're used to exotic scales and modes, then you can kind of move around and you might have your footing and might be a little more comfortable. But if this is brand new to you, you might feel like you're drowning or you're in the ocean, and you need a life preserver or somebody to come and help you. But just try to tread water. You don't have to worry about being Yngwie or Marty Friedman or Jeff Loomis or somebody. Just be yourself and kind of tackle this stuff at your own pace. And the next thing you know, some of this stuff's going to pop up in your music and your playing. I can almost guarantee it. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Net Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.